There is a place that is spoken about only in whispers, a dark area that spawns the beginnings of urban legends, a place where anything can happen and usually does. During the light of day, it hides just outside of view, but when the sun goes down, spirits, creatures of the night, roam free, and things do go bump in the night. It is in every state and every country, and there is no escaping it, no matter how safe you feel behind your locked doors and latched windows. So we invite you to turn down the lights and turn up your radio while we join Dave Schrader and Tim Dennis, your hosts, on a journey into the darkness on the edge of town.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us here in the darkness on the edge of town. I'm your host, Dave Schrader. Along with me, as always, Mr. Timothy Dennis. Good evening, Tim.
Good evening.
How are you doing, sir?
Doing all right.
Good. We got a bunch of good shows in the hopper lately. Got a lot of different guests that we've had on, covering so many ranges of topics. And we have had, I want to make a quick mention, we had so many, such a strong response to our Most Haunted show last week with Yvette and Carl, and people either loved it or absolutely hated it. But an interesting sideline from that show is that we did get a contact from Derek Akora's people. So, Tim, it looks like at the end of June, we get to hear the other side of the story.
I'm looking forward to it.
So am I. Derek Akora and Sam, his spiritual guide, will be joining us on the Darkness on the Edge of Town. He's going to talk to us about the different events and shed some light on what he says is the truth to why he is no longer a part of Most Haunted, and shed some more light on the whole story. Now, I do want, for those of you that are fans of our show and fans of Most Haunted, we had some fantastic videos pointed out to us after the show, which I wish we would have known about. I certainly would have loved to have played them, but if you get a chance, go to YouTube. And it was pointed out to me, and I think it's only fair because Derek was under quite a bit of the scrutiny on the last show, talking about what fraud and fake he was. If you look up Most Haunted and look up Yvette and fraud, there is some compelling evidence that Yvette Fielding was caught. And, I don't know, it's something you have to look at and judge for yourself, but there's definitely some compelling evidence on both sides. If you'd really like a really funny video, you will look up Mary Loves Dick on YouTube, and it is Derek Akora, and it sounds filthy, but it's really not. It's just what he was saying. He was trying to pass a message on from Mary. So when you get a chance to see the video, it's really cute. He starts channeling, and what ensues is very funny. So if you get a chance, go to YouTube and check it out. Again, I know it sounds filthy, and I apologize for the listeners that may be offended by that, but it is truly just him trying to pass a message on from Mary to Richard. But unfortunately, he went by the name of Dick, and the ensuing joke is pretty good after that.
When you go to that video, there's also another video where during the live special in Transylvania, Yvette slaps Carl like 3 times. And the ending is hysterical. You'll see it on the right-hand side. You got to check that one out, too.
Yeah, there's definitely some good video of that. So you're going to want to check out all the stuff that's going on. I want to make a quick mention, too, from our sponsor at the South Coast Paranormal Convention taking place July 20th and the 21st at the Haunted Glen Tavern Inn in Santa Paula. We do have a link for it on our website right at the top of our flip banner, so check it out. There's going to be workshops, seances, tours, investigations. There are going to be talks by Chris Fleming, Richard Sennett, Patrick Burns, myself from Darkness Radio. Terror Normal will be there, and that's an interesting story, too, we should touch briefly on. But Derek Bartlett from Capers will be there, Chad J. Saunders, Tom Durant, Guy Jackson, Bill Murphy, our good buddy from the largest ghost town that we had on a couple months ago, or a couple weeks back, rather, is going to be out there showing his video footage. And Bill also follows us around at our live events and does video of that. So it's going to be an interesting program, so please check it out. If you want information, you can call 805-933-5550. Again, that's 805-933-5550. And you should be able to get more information there. Click the link and it'll take you directly to their site, and the link again is at the top of our links flip banner page. Appreciate you all tuning in with us tonight. And as I just alluded to, Terranormal just released an interesting bulletin on MySpace and on their official site that Terranormal as we know it is kind of done. Unfortunately, we're about in the same dark spot you are. We don't understand exactly what went down or what's changing. According to the information from the Kalik camp I'm reading on the boards here, is that Terranormal, as we know it, is done, but something else, I guess like the phoenix rising from the ashes, there's something else in the works here, and we should be hearing back from Chad Kalik on what's going to be happening. So as soon as we know, we'll let you know so you can stop bombarding Tim and I with emails and questions about what happened. We really don't know, and I don't know if it's a personal issue between the two guys. I don't know if it's a business issue. I don't know if I don't know what happened. So I'm as much in the dark, and I certainly love those two guys to death and don't want to put myself in the middle of anything that's going on and let them do their own business, and we'll just be here to support them when they come out of whatever they're doing and whatever their new endeavors are. With that said, now let's move on to tonight's guest. Something I'm really excited about, Tim. We usually have a specialized guest on. Mm-hmm. We talk about Bigfoot, or we talk about UFOs, or we talk about alien abduction. And by the way, I do want to make a mention. I had a bunch of emails, too, regarding our alien abduction guest that we had last week, saying that he was a little too sensitive and he should learn to man up and such, because he couldn't take the the joking about anal probing and the fact that they're opening up a theme park in Roswell, New Mexico. It's real easy to sit back and laugh and joke, and of course, we all think it sounds kind of funny because until we've been probed ourselves, it's kind of hard to believe that this actually goes on. But out of respect, I am sorry that if we offended him or any of his friends or fans. The temper of our show is we're very lighthearted and we like to have some fun here, and didn't take into consideration that what happened to that gentleman was very traumatic. So, for all of you wanting me to bash on the guests, I've told you before, we don't do that. That's not what our show's about. Yeah. We're here to help spread the word about the paranormal, share people's different theories, philosophies, and ideas with you, so then that way you can judge for yourself. I'm not a Catholic priest up here telling you my religion is the only religion. I'm telling you that this is what we're all interested in. Let's listen to all the different sides. What makes sense to you, run with it, and what doesn't, discard and just enjoy it for good, clean entertainment. So again, I just say that because I do feel bad that some people felt so angry at this guy for being so sensitive about it. But we haven't been strapped to a table and had things probed into us and implants and crazy stuff. So
you really got to understand his point of view.
Oh,
you know?
Yeah,
and if he's sensitive about it, that's fine.
All right, and I'm sorry, we're stripping time away from our guest. Nope. We'll go back to this. But anyway, as I said, we always have somebody on that's very specialized. And our next guest is really a cool find. And actually, it was funny because he had contacted me about having somebody else on as a guest, and he was recommending I talk to this person, and then I reached out to him and say, how can I get this person? And he said, well, here's a contact number, but just so you're familiar, I've got this background. And he went into this, and Tim, the guy has written books on aliens, strange encounters, John Lennon, the secret prophecy of Fatima, you name it, this guy seems to have written about it over the last 20, 30 years. And it was quite a coup to be able to capture him and bring him on the show tonight. Capture him, so suddenly I'm abducting my guest.
He's like Bigfoot.
Exactly.
We got him.
We snagged him, we dragged him in, and we'll release him as soon as we're done with the show this evening. But if everybody out there in Darkness Land could put your hands together, a cyber clap for Mr. Timothy Green Beckley. Good evening, sir. Thanks for joining us here.
Well, good to be on with you guys.
I appreciate you.
I've been listening to your program for the last couple of years.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I'm glad that you've...
Yes, I also write for Fame magazine, and
right.
They run my ad in there every issue, a little ad in the back. I put out the publication's Bizarre, and Conspiracy Journal. And, of course, I see your faces in there all the time, and I've known about the show, and I decided one time to listen, and I've continued to enjoy it.
Well, thank you very much. We appreciate that, and I appreciate you coming on the show to talk to us about the many different topics that you've covered.
Yeah.
Now, give us a little background. Now, you told me that you've written from everything from Fate to The Inquirer.
Oh, well, my goodness, yeah. I started in this. I bought a little, it's hard to even know where to begin, but let's start at the beginning. I lived in a house that was haunted. Okay, in New Jersey. When I was about 6 years old, there was doors opening and closing and lights going on and off, and a basic poltergeist phenomena. I remember one time being at the seat at the kitchen table, and this big chinaware, the plate, kind of slid across the table and fell onto the floor, but it didn't break. And a couple people had, I remember one night my mother and I had heard the sound of it seemed like a baby crying. So this was fairly late at night, and my mother had always been interested in this type of stuff and seemed to be paranormally inclined, as was my sister, perhaps even more so than I was. Anyway, my mom and I, we heard the sound of a baby crying, and we went to the back door, and there in the snow, it was in the middle of winter or sometime, where what appeared to be little booty prints, and we followed it outside for a little distance, and then it disappeared. Now, years later, we found out that there was a passing in the house. Going back to, I believe, around 1914 or so, there was a epidemic, and people were dying from the basic plague or whatever the epidemic was then, and it killed a lot of people, millions of people all over the world. And apparently, there was a young child and its mother who had passed away at the same time. And people have seen them roaming around the house. I mean, people didn't even know the story that I just explained to you, and so there seemed to be someone who was haunting. So I kind of grew up with this, all around me. And a few years later, I even had a couple of out of body experiences. The best way to explain them is I remember kind of like waking up in the middle of the night and finding myself floating above the bed in the room, and I could hear these strange, like music or sounds or whatever in the room with me, and then all of a sudden I would find myself back into my body and sweating very profusely. And I guess this happened, a couple of times. And I know I was always just kind of intrigued by this. It was something that fascinated me, and I guess my mom kind of prompted an interest in it.
Just out of curiosity, now what you just explained almost sounds like like you were suffering from an illness. And I don't even mean mentally, but I mean maybe you had a fever or something that you were pushing yourself out.
It's possible. Let's face it. This is going back 50 years ago. So I can't claim that I remember all the specific details,
sure.
Of the episodes. But that's what I feel at the time. Yeah, I did have some periods there where I was under doctor's care and all. I had asthma, and I've always had a touch of polio as a child. So that could have no doubt influenced. But whatever it is that influences people to be involved in certain things, it seems that it usually starts at a very young age. Mm-hmm. And so I had an experience living in a house that I think may have had some poltergeist phenomenon. And at the age of 10, I had my first of 3 UFO sightings. And they were basically it was a warm summer night, like in July and August, and we were all seated out on the front porch, because in those days nobody had any air conditioning, so we would just kind of sit outside until it cooled off. And we were seated on the porch, and somebody came running over to the house and brought our attention to 2 bright objects in the sky. One was pretty much overhead, as I recall, and one was directly across the street over an abandoned factory building. And we watched these things kind of circle in the sky. They kind of changed position. And then one of them blinked out as if somebody had pulled a light switch, And the next day there was a little item in the newspaper that other people had witnessed these objects, but the authorities were saying that they were nothing more unconventional than weather balloons. I guess that was their explanation. Weather balloons.
The famous old weather balloons.
Well, the weather balloons were the flares of yesterday. Today, UFOs seem to be either temperature inversions of hallucinations or flares. In those days, they were weather balloons or high-flying geese. That was always an explanation that was given, high-flying geese. And anyway, so I think I wrote, probably it was about 10 or 11 years old, I actually wrote a letter to the local newspaper saying that, I knew that these things seemed to be under intelligent control, which they were. They weren't bobbing and weaving in the air current. They seemed to have a pattern or some intelligence behind them. Now, I can't say I saw any little green men or any, I didn't witness any landing or anything like that, but they were just above the cloud layer, and they seemed to be fairly large and very bright, and other people did witness this. So I started reading, and in those days, the authorities on the subject were like Frank Edwards, who actually had a radio show. The current Fate magazine has an article about how he was actually taken off the air because he talked too much about flying saucers on the show, and this would have been in the mid 1950s or so. He was talking about UFOs back then. One of the few commentators during that period to be involved in the subject. And so I started reading whatever I could, books by Major Donald Kehoe, and there was another book, a report on unidentified flying objects by Edward Ruppelt, who had actually worked for the Air Force of Project Blue Book. And some of the sightings that they talk about were fairly, stunning. These were airplane pilots who had witnessed these things. Some in fact, years later, I remember talking to somebody who was written up in one of Major Kehoe's books. His name was Graham Bethune. He lived down in Trenton, New Jersey. He just passed away, about 90 years old. And he told this incredible story, which is in the Kehoe book, about how he was flying over Alaska, and he saw these two or three objects down way below them, and all of a sudden they shot up right out of his plane and circled the plane and took off at fantastic speed. So these were pretty credible witnesses that were written about, and I said, geez, there must be really something to this, because not only are there credible witnesses, but I seem to have seen something too, which I couldn't explain.
Well, that's the way it seems with so many people, that once you've opened up that door, and we've talked about that on the show before, you open up that door, it seems you get to experience all the cool stuff. So you've actually covered most of the gambit yourself in all this.
Well, I did. Yeah, I've even you talk about Bigfoot. Well, I've investigated Bigfoot. I think it was one of the first. I used to write for a magazine called Saga, which was one of these men's action adventure magazines that came out. It was very popular during the 60s and 70s. And I wrote probably I'm sure it was the first article on the skunk ape of the Everglades.
Oh, okay.
And in fact, that article is reprinted in one of my recent books that we just put out called Strange Saga, because I took all the articles that I did for that magazine, UFO Report, and Ray Palmer. I don't know if you're familiar with Ray Palmer. Ray Palmer was the original publisher and editor of Fate magazine.
Right.
And he published an article by Kenneth Arnold talking about Arnold's first sighting over Mount Rainier, and so I had written. I used to do a regular column for Ray Palmer back in the 1960s. I did a regular column for Ray Palmer's magazine called On the Trail of Flying Saucers, which I kind of chronologued my trips around the country, my travels. I started out, I guess, even as a teenager, just going around. I went to the Brown Mountain and tried to investigate the Mountain Lights. Joshua Warren, I'm sure he's been on your show. He's a big expert on that, and was there. So I just would travel all over the country and investigate these things and talk to witnesses. And in fact, it kind of irks me, because today, you get a lot of these people on there and they claim to be investigators. Well, they've never really investigated anything. They've just been on the internet,
right?
And geez, I used to spend days just calling people on the phone and taping all these conversations and things. And now I'm not so much involved in that aspect of it, although I still work with people who are field representatives and reporters on this. I'm more busy actually publishing this material. We have a publishing company, Interlight Global Communications. We put out about 170 books and DVDs to date. So I kind of cover stuff by Brad Steiger and T. Lobsick Rampa, and I don't know, just everything you can imagine, I guess, because I've always had an overall interest in this. And people say, well, you must be a diehard believer. No, I wouldn't go that far. I'm skeptical at times. I have my days when I'm really skeptical,
Right.
and other days it may be a little bit more gullible. But I always just try to keep up, an even keel attitude on this, and keep my feet planted on the ground and my head up in the clouds, I guess you could say.
Tell me this: with the skunk ape investigation you did you find any compelling proof or see anything you thought that might?
Well, no. Most of my investigation on that one was over the phone, but we did interview a professor who actually had set up a team of field investigators, and they went out into the swamp, and they actually had these things were coming very, very close to their camp. And they had the usual, footprints and things along that line, and some very compelling witnesses who had seen this thing. I mean, even in those days, there were dozens and dozens of people, and they all, had the same report of this odor associated with the creatures. I was convinced that somebody was seeing something, especially when you consider that this was back before anybody else was even reporting it. Right. Today you say, well, geez, it's been in the newspapers and it's been on all the radio shows and all, but this was the groundbreaking, work. Although I guess if you go back into the history down there, you find that other people have seen it going back even to the 1930s and all. No matter how you investigate this stuff, it always goes back. There's no beginning to it. It's just been around. It's part of the Earth's the bizarreness or history or legends and lore and mythology, and it's still here with us today. Whether it's UFOs or angels or Bigfoot or
Dick Clark.
ghostly phenomena.
Right.
Dick Clark.
Yeah, Dick Clark. He's been around forever, too, isn't he? There's really no proof that he was ever started anywhere. So we're going to take a quick break. Our guest is Timothy Green Beckley, and we're going to cover a wide gambit of the different aspects of the paranormal with our guest. We'll be back with more right after this.
Once you have seen Dave and Tim in the light, you'll understand why we must return to the darkness on the edge of town. Stay tuned. There is more to come.
For 58 years, Fate has consistently supplied its loyal readership with a broad array of true reports of the strange and unknown. Fate is a factual magazine containing articles by experts in all walks of life, and by others just like you who have something dynamic, significant, and truthful to say. Keep up with the latest on angels and miracles, psychic phenomena, ghosts, UFOs, archaeological hotspots, alternative science, and much, much more. To receive your free Fate magazine, call now at 1-800-728-2730 or visit our website at www.fatemag.com. That's 1-800-728-2730 or www.fatemag.com. What are you waiting for? Your fate awaits.
Are you tired of reading about what couple in Hollywood is breaking up or divorcing? Have you ever wondered where you can find the news that covers the subjects that you are really interested in? I would like to invite you to visit supernaturalnews.com. Supernatural News uses the latest internet technology to search for the topics we know you will be interested in reading. News of the latest Bigfoot, UFO, or Loch Ness Monster sightings. Read about the latest conspiracy theories and urban legends. Supernatural News, where belief and reality merge.
You hear footsteps and things bumping and banging in the middle of the night. Could it be paranormal activity? Or is it just Dave and Tim raiding your fridge?
Beer.
Strange things happen in the darkness on the edge of town.
Well, good evening and welcome back to the show. Our guest is Timothy Green Beckley, and he's written articles for just about every major magazine on all aspects of the paranormal. A couple of things that interested me, Tim, as we were heading off to break, I was reviewing your bio and the information that you've written about. Now, when you were as a celebrity journalist, you mentioned that Muhammad Ali has had more UFO sightings than anyone else.
Yeah, I was a stringer for, I've edited, believe it or not, I've edited over 30 different newsstand magazines, periodicals, most of which never lasted very long, and some of which only lasted one issue. I mean, I edited magazines like Moped Action.
Excellent.
You can imagine, you can imagine how much action there is on a moped. Well, these were not, now, these were not my ideas, but somehow I got involved with all these pulp magazine publishers here in New York, and they were always coming up with something that they thought was timely. Whatever the latest craze was, they would try to jump in on the bandwagon. And
yes,
give me
Rubik's Cube Monthly, wasn't it?
Oh my goodness, there were more magazines that you can shake a stick of. I did soap opera magazines. I did a football magazine. I never watched a game in my life, but I did do a number of UFO and sci-fi type publications. In fact, one was called UFO Universe, and that lasted for 11 years, actually, along with about 5 other spin-off publications. And they were issued, bi-monthly or quarterly. And we had some very good, writers like Brad Steiger and Scott Corrales and Sean Castile and so forth, writing for us. But I guess, back in the late 1960s, I got a job working for Jim Moseley, who was kind of like the first generation of ufologists, and he had a magazine called Saucer News, which was a semi-professional publication at that time. It was the only one with a large circulation. I think he had about 12,000 magazines, 12,000 subscribers, and he had taken over my little newsletter. I had about 1,400 subscribers to my Interplanetary News Service report, and it just got too much for me to handle because in those days there were no quick copy centers or anything like that. You had to mimeograph the stuff and collate it and staple it. Well, try stapling and collating 40 pages, You'd have to put out the ironing board, and each page had a stack of paper. You had to go, and it got too much, and so Jim offered to take over my subscribers and hired me. So I started coming into Manhattan every day, and working, and somehow I got involved with all these other little publishers and so forth, and began writing for the tabloids. And in those days, there was more than Britney Spears and Paris Hilton. I mean, they ran articles on a lot of different celebrities, past celebrities, present celebrities, and so forth. It was a whole different ballgame, you know. And, of course, they did run a lot of articles on the paranormal, and UFOs in particular was something that they were intrigued in, and ran articles almost on a weekly basis. So I would throw them a line or two, a paragraph about someone that I wanted to interview, and then we would go out and spend maybe the whole afternoon interviewing this, this person, whoever, the celebrity, whoever it was, and I got some very interesting stories. Now, even though the Inquirer was more interested in maybe their personal life, I always managed to throw in somewhere during the course of the interview, have you ever had anything paranormal happen to you? Have you ever seen a UFO? And you'd be surprised how many of them did. In fact, they did a book that's still available from Amazon called UFOs Among the Stars, and there are people in there like old Bill Shatner told me about his experience with a MIB motorcycle rider. He was out in the California desert. I guess he belonged to a little motorcycle club out there, and he was driving his motorcycle and all the gear, motorcycle gear, and the leather and the helmet and all that. Must have been, he said, over 100 degrees. And he was riding in a pack with about 6 or 7 other riders, and he was following them. He was the last in line. And they saw some object up in the distance, which seemed to follow them for a while, if I remember the story correctly. And then his motorcycle kind of conked out on him, and I guess he thought, and he wasn't sure whether this was like a vivid imagination or something caused by the sun or not, but he seems to believe that there was another motorcycle driver, a rider that joined the pack, so that when the other motorcycle riders that were part of his group turned around, they thought he was still following them, behind in the line, and he was really lost in the desert back a mile or two, with this big bike, run out of gas and the whole bit. But he said that this object came over, and it seemed to guide him in the right direction, and he finally found a road in the gas station. He said it was almost as if the object had actually pulled the bike, because you try pushing a bike across sand. I guess it's not a very easy task. So he does believe that his life was saved by a UFO, and I'm not the only person he told the story to. That was kind of part of his his rift or spiel back in those days. But there were all David Bowie. I met David Bowie, of course, for a while. There was his persona was the
Ziggy Stardust
from Mars, right? And not many people realize this, but David Bowie was actually editor of a little UFO newsletter when he was a teenager in England.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. So I guess that kind of influenced his, his
persona and musical,
persona to some degree.
Sure.
I would guess so. Also, I was very good friends with one of Jimi Hendrix's original band members. Jimmy was in a band called the Squires, long before Jimi Hendrix Experience,
Okay.
And they used to play around clubs in New York State. And the bass player of the group was a fellow by the name of Curtis Knight. And I knew Curtis fairly well because I'm involved with the New York music scene for years, and especially the more classical rock, not so much the punk stuff, although I did know a few people and hung out at CBGBs and all that, But anyway, Curtis told me the story, which is in the book, and I still have tapes of this. Curtis has since passed on. But apparently, Jimi Hendrix and his band were going up to Woodstock. This is not the Woodstock Festival, but there were clubs and all that they played up there, and it was storming out. It was snowing, and their van or where they were driving at the time got stuck in the snow, snowdrift. And they weren't able to get out of the snowdrift, and apparently they were stuck there for quite some while, and the car started filling with carbon monoxide, and apparently, according to this is Curtis's story anyway, that Jimmy had told him firsthand that an object had landed. It was a cone-shaped object, if I remember Curtis's description, and something like a being like Mothman came out, because it had a big wingspan, and it just walked around the vehicle that they were in, and it melted the snow, and they were able to start the vehicle and get out of there before something more tragic had happened. Now, you might say, well, that sounds like a concocted story or something, that Jimmy fantasized. But actually, Hendrix was quite into the whole UFO paranormal phenomena. Curtis did a book that we published years later called Jimi Hendrix Star Child, and it told all about Jimmy's involvement with all the paranormal. And in fact, I remember seeing years ago a film which you could probably still find somewhere. It's called Rainbow Bridge, and it was shot in Hawaii, and it was a concert at the one of the volcano craters there. And Jimmy plays like 3 or 4 songs on the video, and then he sits around inside one of the compounds or tents there and sits down and raps for about 10 or 15 minutes about the Space Brothers and the auras and the inner Earth and that whole thing. So he definitely was involved and intrigued by that. So I have no reason to think that he made up a story about this being. I mean, it's part of the whole picture, And then of course John Lennon. John Lennon came to one of my shows that I gave one time. And we talked to him on the phone, and he was very intrigued with the whole paranormal thing. In fact, there was a healer who believed I was retired now anyway. He lives in Florida by the name of Dean Kraft. And Dean had the power of psychokinesis, the ability to move objects. And John told me, and Yoko confirmed this as well, that this fellow Dean Kraft was in his apartment one time at the Coda building here in New York, and he apparently waved his hand and moved his hand over a dish of candy that was wrapped in cellophane on the on the table there in front of him, and a piece of the candy came out over the side of the dish, and he kind of moved his hand and it fell onto the floor, kind of as if he were leading it out. And I did see Dean do something like that a couple of years later because I was doing an article again for the Inquirer, and I figured, well, let me track down this the story that John was telling me and see if there's any truth to it. And Dean Kraft, he's got a book or 2 out, and he told him, told me the story about how he apparently had some UFO experiences, and a lot of times this paranormal activity that happens or psychokinetic power, even with Uri Geller, starts with some sort of UFO-related experience, And I did see Dean move something across the carpet one night, a pen that he just kind of moved his hand over, and it seemed to follow his hand across the carpet. But, it wasn't under laboratory scientific or laboratory conditions, I have to admit, and it was somewhat dark in the room. I don't know. It was there. I saw it move. I couldn't tell you how it was done. Some people maybe suggest that static electricity caused the pile in the carpet or something. I don't know. It's just one of those things that I've witnessed that I don't have a ready explanation for.
How about Muhammad Ali? We started off with that. What did you actually speak to him about this, or are these just stories that were related to you?
Muhammad Ali and I were actually somewhat close at one point. There was an article in the New York Daily News, the paper,
right,
to the effect that Ali. This was maybe 4 or 5 inches article. Ali had been trading up in Central Park and had witnessed these UFOs come overhead, and he had other witnesses that had seen this with him. So we called up, at the time, his manager or trainer was a fellow by the name of Angelo Dundee.
Oh, sure.
Oh, yeah, and he invited us over to, at 6 a.m., to stroll with Ali in Central Park, where he had the sighting. Apparently he was training, I think, for the Oscar Bonavita fight at the moment, which is probably not one of his best-known fights. But anyway, and so we went up there at 6 o'clock in the morning, which is way early for me. That's what I'm usually turning in, But anyway, we got up there, and Ali just pointed over the apartment buildings. This is where we saw the thing, and he described it as like 2 very bright light bulbs in the sky. And his manager came over, and there was another fellow, I can't remember what it was, Angelo Dundee, and there was another fellow that was working with him for years. They both came over, and they confirmed that they had, seen these objects, and they were puzzled. They didn't know, what it was. And Ali explained that actually he had been interested in this because it was part of Elijah Muhammad's prophecy or visions or something, which he talked about in one of his books. In fact, Ali gave me a drawing that he had made of one of these craft and autographed it for me. And we went to his house a couple of times, and I think he lived in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. And he showed us around, and we brought down some UFO photographs and some films. And we showed one of these films, and he said, "Oh, this is exactly what I'd seen." And he wanted to know if he could take the film because he wanted to show it as part. He was giving some lectures to colleges and all around the country if he could take the film, incorporate it into his talk. And we saw, of course, by all means. And then we saw him quite a few times after that. We even went to his training camp. We took Uri Geller up there, and
sure.
Uri was good friend of mine here in New York. I was writing for a newspaper, the Manhattan Gazette, and we do articles on some of the local psychics and stuff. And Uri had just come into town, and he was interested in meeting Ali too. He wanted to show Ali some of the things that he could do. Well, it turned out that Ali had been warned or told by some of his magician friends, because Ali, most people don't realize, is an amateur magician.
Oh, okay.
And he was warned by, I don't know, the Raising Randy or whoever, right? that he should be on the lookout for some fraud or deception. But anyway, we went up there, and Uri did the bending key routine, which I had seen him do a couple of times, of course, even in my apartment, and his apartment, and other people's places as well. And that seemed to be darn right legitimate. I mean, I saw him do some things that I don't think he was, doing any magician tricks with it. He wasn't pulling a rabbit out of his hat. But the two things that happened up at Ali's camp there in Pennsylvania while he was training. Ali at that point was, I think, in his life, was married to Belinda, one of his wives, right? And she was more interested, actually, than Ali was, because Ali wanted to show that he could do tricks. He brought out some little ropes and stuff, and started, cutting them and tying them together, and whatever tricks, illusionists do, and so forth. So Uri got a kind of, miffed about this and wanted to get a little bit more attention himself. So anyway, he started showing other people that were seemed to be more intrigued by this. And I remember he had a Belinda Ali off in the corner there somewhere, and she had a ring on, and I remember him putting his hand over her hand, where the ring was, and just kind of pressing on it. And he said, well, sometimes I can do like amazing things, or sometimes things happen. Let me know if you feel anything unusual. So he held his hand there maybe for, 30 seconds, a minute or so, and she started saying, I feel, there's some heat coming from your hand. My hand is getting warmer. And he held his hand there a little bit while longer, and then he took his hand away from her hand, and a ring that she had on her finger, the stone inside the ring had disappeared. And I remember the setting looked like it was kind of bent out of shape. Now, people ask me, was it a valuable ring? I guess not, because I don't remember her ever getting it back, and I don't remember her ever complaining about it either. But it was fairly amazing. I mean, he wasn't sitting there picking at the ring or doing anything.
Right.
He just had his hand over hers, But even more intriguing than that, there was a fellow who, and I can't remember his name, but I did do the article for the Inquirer at the time, who was Ali's sparring partner. Up there he was training at the camp. And the fellow had a young man, I don't know, 20, mid-20s or something like that, maybe even younger, very muscular, And he had on a St. Christopher's medal or some kind of holy medal around his neck,
Right.
But it wasn't a cheap little piece of tin. I mean, I had looked at it; it was pretty sturdy. And Uri took his hand, or his fingers, and pressed on the metal and left an indent in it.
Oh, really?
So yeah, I saw this with I witnessed it with my own eyes. I'm sure the fellow still has the medal somewhere in his desk. Well, I've seen other people do that. Now, there's a gal by the name of Phyllis Benjamin who runs the Fortean group down in Washington D.C.
Mm-hmm.
and they have annual meetings. They've been doing this for the last 20 years or so ago. And I remember I was there with John Keel one year, and he's written, of course, Warfare and Prophecies.
Right.
He's been a friend of mine since the 1960s, Anyway, they had a luncheon, and at the luncheon they passed out at random. They were in the cafeteria or dining room area, in the hotel there, and they just picked up at random the silverware that was on their table, and they did an experiment to see if anybody could bend the silverware and stuff like that. Well, a couple of people bent it with their thumb by pressing on it. Well, Phyllis was showing everybody all day long, and she didn't know how she did this, and she was just as much as old as anybody. She had a utensil, I forget it was a fork or a knife or what have you, and this thing was a pretty heavy piece of metal. I mean, this was not like a cafeteria eating silverware. This is the real McCoy. This thing was bent like a pretzel. I mean, we're not even talking like bent over like somebody, forced it or something, like Randy would do. We're talking about something that was twisted around. I don't even know how anybody could do that without having, some kind of something from their workshop in the kitchen or something with them. I don't know. I mean, it was that total. I could tell that she was just utter amazement about it, and everybody else there was just kind of floored by that. And there were I guess out of maybe about 80 people who attempted the experiment in the room, maybe 3 or 4 of them did get something to bed, but hers was twisted. This thing was twisted like a pretzel.
Wow, that's amazing.
So
Boy, you've met amazing people.
Well, but Yuri has got to be right up there. I mean, people say, "Oh, he's a showman, he's this and that," and the other. Yeah, but if you get you get all these people that are involved in the paranormal, you get every group. It's the same thing with UFO witnesses. You get the highest caliber to the lowest denomination. It crosses everybody's life path.
Right. Well, we've got to take another quick break here. We'll be back for our last segment. Stick with us. We've got an interesting interview going with Timothy Green Beckley. We'll be back with more right after this.
The New York Times has raved about the show. The Star Tribune says it's paranormally funny. And the Biscayne Bugle said, how could they put this crap on the air and live with themselves?
I am so sorry for everything that has happened. Because in spite of what Mike says now, it is my fault. Because it was my project. Everything had to be my way. And this is where we've ended up.
Stay tuned. There's more to come from the darkness on the edge of town.
For 58 years, Fate has consistently supplied its loyal readership with a broad array of true reports of the strange and unknown. Fate is a factual magazine containing articles by experts in all walks of life, and by others just like you who have something dynamic, significant, and truthful to say. Keep up with the latest on angels and miracles, psychic phenomena, ghosts, UFOs, archaeological hotspots, alternative science, and much, much more. To receive your free Fate magazine, call now at 1-800-728-2730 or visit our website at www.fatemag.com. That's 1-800-728-2730 or www.fatemag.com. What are you waiting for? Your fate awaits.
If you read Taps Paramag every month, you'll be able to tell the difference between the absurd
Could not go to work because Bigfoot stole my car.
and the creepy. Taps Paramag takes you where few would ever go on purpose. From exclusive interviews with the cast of The Ghost Hunters to the latest trends in technology in the field of the paranormal. To join our journey, order at tapsparamag.com.
Are you tired of reading about what couple in Hollywood is breaking up or divorcing? Have you ever wondered where you can find the news that covers the subjects that you are really interested in? I would like to invite you to visit supernaturalnews.com. Supernatural News uses the latest internet technology to search for the topics we know you will be interested in reading. News of the latest Bigfoot, UFO, or Loch Ness Monster sightings. Read about the latest conspiracy theories and urban legends. Supernatural News, where belief and reality merge.
Two ghosts walk into a bar and see another ghost at the bar, point at them, and yell, boo! One of the ghosts yells back, boo-hoo! And the ghost at the bar yells back, well, you don't have to cry about it. Ah, hell, you try writing this.
You magnificent bastard! I salute you!
Welcome back to the darkness on the edge of town.
Hey, welcome back to the show. Our guest tonight is Timothy Green Beckley, and he's been described as the Hunter Thompson of ufology by the editor of UFO magazine, Nancy Barnes. He's had quite a life. I mean, as we were just hearing, he's talked and hung out with most of the major celebrities you could imagine out there, and has had a chance to interview.
We've only covered about 2 years.
That's wow. That's only 2 years of your time. Well, sit back. We're here for another 5 hours with our guest.
Oh, right. well, we used to do 5 hours in the old days. There was this fellow, I guess you've heard of him. He's pretty much legend, Long John Nebel.
Yep.
Long John, I guess he, if there is such a thing, invented the paranormal radio, and he was on every night from midnight till 5 in the morning, 5:30 on weekends, 6 days a week. And I think one night a week they replayed the archived shows. But of course, in those days, archived shows weren't like they are now. Archived shows were on like 12-inch reels.
Right, exactly.
In fact,
hey, we'd love to do 5 hours. Trust me, we're just looking for a radio station willing to give us 5 hours on their radio.
Here's an interesting little sideline. Now, John had this kind of gee whiz attitude. He had on some of the most fantastic people. And here I was a teenager. I'd be hiding under my cover at night so my mother didn't catch me, listening to the transistor radio, listening to Howard Menger and Gray Barker talk about the Men in Black. And years later, not only did I meet these guys, but I ended up publishing their books and writing for them and so forth and so on. In fact, Gray Barker, who ran his Saucerian press down in Clarksburg, West Virginia, and actually was the first investigator of the Mothman, he published my first book called The Shaver Mystery and the Inner Earth, and I guess it was about 15 at the time. Well, that book is still in print now. It's called Subterranean Worlds Inside Earth, and I've added quite a bit of material, to it. So Long John was on every night, and then I was even a guest on The Amazing Randy. I don't think many people realize this, but The Amazing Randy had an all-night radio show in New York because Long John moved over from one station to the other, and they needed a replacement. And Randy had the show for a couple of years on there, And I must say, of course, he's got the reputation of being the world's biggest debunker of the paranormal, but he was a fairly nice guy. I mean, he didn't really, in those days, he really didn't slam the guest on the show. He pretty much just let him, take the lead, and he had some pretty, the strange types on there as well. But Long John, he led the gang. I mean, he was the fellow that kind of invented this, and it was years after his passing before anybody came along to replace him. Although I was traveling around the country, I was probably the only person doing this pretty much full time, and I'd book myself on all kinds of little, I hate to say rinky-dink shows. I remember one time I was on a show in Virginia Beach at 6 a.m. Sunday morning, because in those days the FCC has some kind of regulation that you had to have so many hours of public broadcasting or something, for the local community. Well, they always threw it on between 5 and 7 a.m. on Sunday when they knew nobody was listening. Oh, boy. Well, anyway, I was on this TV show in Virginia Beach, and I was upstaged by a clown. They had some local clown from a little circus on there, and I thought I was going to be the main guest. I got the last 10 minutes.
See, 9 tonight, you get almost 2 hours. How does that sound?
There you go. But anyway, let me finish with the Long John story. So now Long John, he had 7 or 8 marriages, right? I mean, but his last, he was married to Candy Jones, who in the 1950s was like the top model in the United States. And she, towards the end of his career, John was very ill. He had cancer, and he'd come on, and he was a trooper. As soon as that microphone was turned on, he'd give his pitch. But towards the end, Candy took over more and more of the responsibilities and having the guest on. And John and I was on the show maybe 3 or 4 times. He didn't take John didn't particularly like anybody, I don't think. He was kind of kept himself and all that, But Candy was a little bit more open about this, and she had me on almost every Sunday, to be honest with you. And I'd talk about my trips to Loch Ness and all these other places I went in, and she'd have me on for 5 hours, sometimes by myself, which was a dreadful experience when you have to do the long haul. And anyway, she told me a story off the air. She said, please don't tell anybody about this, but she's passed away many years ago. It's been in print, so I have no problem about telling you now. But she kind of had a skeptical attitude towards this, even maybe more so than John did. But she went along with it because the Paranormal had made their show, basically famous all over the country. She told me about had a whole file cabinet full of these archived tapes that they would replay. Every couple of times a week they'd put on the old shows. And like I say, they were in the 10 or 12-inch, reels. And she had to hook up, the tapes and listen to them for at least 10 or 15 minutes to see who the guests were. And then, of course, none of them were labeled. I guess she had the same problem that probably most of us people do today. Nobody, file anything away.
Right,
it just piles up, and my God, who's on this and what's the guest and what are they talking about? Anyway, she's listening to one of these tapes, fast forwards it, and she hears the voice of her mother on there calling her by her, just the name that her mother would call, like a family nickname or something like that. And she said, this EVP was just starting, people were just starting to talk about it. I mean, I forget, it was maybe the 70s sometime, so it wasn't that well known, although I guess Stuart Robb used to be on the show. He passed away in his 90s a couple of years ago, but he was one of the first, lived in Anaheim, California, and they used to sit around and work with the, the tape recorders and stuff like that. Anyway, she was convinced that it was her mother's voice on the tape, and she said there was no, it was like other guests. Her mother had never been in the recording studio or anything like that, and no reason for her voice to be on the tape.
That's amazing. Yeah, those are the cool little stories, the stuff that just sidelines you that you never even know about.
Absolutely, yep.
Let me ask you this real quick, and then we'll move off of the UFO stuff real quick and on to other. You mentioned something about Jackie Gleason getting to see the dead aliens. Now, I've heard that's kind of a myth. Do you know of there being any truth to this?
Well, I've heard the story from a couple of different sources. His ex-wife, where we had originally heard about it, we talked to her on the phone. She had written a book about my life with Jackie Gleason or something, which was never published. I guess they never had gotten a publisher for it. But Jackie was a big believer in UFOs. I mean, he followed this. He had a couple of studies himself, and he was even on the Long John show a couple of times. I mean, he was more of a skeptic than anything else, but he had his sighting, and he has, in fact, his private library on UFOs is at the University of Florida, University of Miami, whatever it is. It's had a huge collection of books on the subject. In fact, it's cataloged now, and I think you can even find it on the internet. But I remember when I was 15 years old, he was sending me checks and ordering stuff and all from me. But the story goes about Jackie was a golf buddy of Richard Nixon,
right?
And apparently Nixon came to his house one day, Palm Springs. No, it must be in Florida. And said, Jackie, I want you to see something. Come with me. And this was at midnight or something. And Jackie left. I guess his wife was there, saw him go. Wondered what the heck was so urgent. And apparently Nixon took him to Andrews Air Force Base or somewhere down there, and took him to the freezer and opened up the freezer and showed him the alien bodies. Now, is there another witness to this or anybody that collaborated? Yeah, actually there is. A fellow by the name of Larry Warren. I don't know. Do you know who Larry is? He was involved in this incident in Bentwaters, England, where they had UFOs landing and coming over the military base there 3 nights in a row, like in the early 1980s.
Wow.
And
no,
apparently, there's a couple of books out on it. It's one of the best documented UFO cases, even more so than the Roswell. And Larry was he was an MP, I believe, stationed at the base at the time, and is among the witnesses, and they saw some credible stuff. I mean, come down in the forest right outside the base, and there were at least a dozen, if not more, witnesses to this thing, and they even exchanged maybe some kind of hand signals or some kind of communication with something inside the craft. Anyway, there's been a couple of books written about it, and Larry's kind of well known in the literature. And Jackie Gleason, being interested in the UFO phenomena, would often like to get these testimonies firsthand. So the one day, Larry gets a call from Gleason inviting him to come to his house. He had a house in New York State that was shaped like a flying saucer. Anyway, Larry Warren goes to the house, and Jackie apparently told him the same story that the wife tells in the unpublished book that was published in the newspaper and so forth, about seeing the little men inside the freezer. So
wow.
Take it for what it's worth. There are an awful lot of people that have seen an awful lot of dead aliens in freezers. That's all my comment on that is. I mean, there's just there's so many aliens floating around. That would be one of my more skeptical moments. I'd have to say. People say, well, what do you think UFOs are? And I have to say, I don't know. I don't know what they are. My thinking on the subject changes from moment to moment. I'm less convinced than I was before that there are some super intelligence from outer space. A lot of them I do believe are UFOs. So when you say UFO, you're really saying unidentified object, which could be a lot of different things. I think we get we throw a lot of pepper into the pot, and a lot of people think it's the same thing, and maybe it isn't.
I agree with you. We're going to be going to the wrap-up at this top of the hour. We're going to come back after the break, and would you like to stay on with us and talk a little bit more about some of the other experiences and stuff you've
done? Sure, and give my email address out.
Yeah, definitely. Why don't we do that right now? We got about a minute. How can people contact you?
Well, I'll tell you. I'd give them 2 free subscriptions to the Bizarre Bazaar. All they have to do is email me and tell me that they heard the show. Mr. UFO, that's MRUFO at webtv.net. MRUFO@webtv.net, and just say you heard the show, and I'll put them on the mailing list and send them the free weekly newsletter and the whole ball of wax.
That's awesome. Well, thank you very much.
There you go.
We've got more to talk to you about after the top of the hour. And for those of you that are just tuning in, you're listening to The Darkness on the Edge of Town. You missed a great first hour. Hopefully we'll have you back here for the second hour. Our guest is Tim Beckley, and Tim has experienced just about every different level of the paranormal and has spoken to just about every major celebrity you can imagine that's been involved in the paranormal in one way, shape, or another. We're going to cover quite a few different topics when we come back, so I want you to stay with us. And again, this show is pre-recorded for Sunday, so if you had questions, I'm sorry we cannot include them on this evening's show, but thank you very much for tuning in anyway. We will have him back, I'm sure, because he's fascinating, and as you know, he's got years and years and years of experience, and as he just told us, after all of this first hour, we've barely scratched the first 2 years. So stick with us as we delve into year 3 of the paranormal experience. We'll be right back with more on the Darkness on the Edge of Town.